It's very good of people to come. I know the pressure that everyone's under in education and in the broader local authority world. So time taken out to come to something like this is very much appreciated. I'm not going to give all the detail. You'll be reassured to know because I'm the managing director, right? So, I can imagine the people really doing this are the ones you want to speak to, and it's they that will explain the research that they've done. I also really have only been in Norfolk for nearly 4 years, so this initiative very much started before I joined, but I was very delighted to discover it, and really it's as a result of Colin's enthusiasm really that it came to light, and I think it's given us the opportunity to look at what we've been doing and really take stock. So it's been a great joining together really of these enthusiasms. So this is Norfolk. Most people pass through it on their way to the beach, but but it really has some other wonderful characteristics. It is many areas of outstanding natural beauty, which I'm a London person, so it's been a whole new life for me, which I've really appreciated. But it is a big county. We serve all of it. It's a population verging on 1 million. We generally speak about its aging demographic because it is a place people like to come to retire, and we do have one of the, I think, 5th most aging populations in the country, but we still have a significant nearly 20% of the population are under 18. Big school, big number of schools to be looking after. Many of them obviously now academized, but still quite a number because of the size and nature of the geography. Some of them are still quite needing to be clustered and to be supported by the local authority. But that's the context of where we are. Maybe before I move on, I'll just say a bit about county councils. If I'm not sure who here is from which part of local government, but I would want to assure there's nothing easy about Norfolk that's any different from probably the same pressures that most of local government is facing. We are losing our our central government rate support grant by 2021. That's the plan. We've had huge cuts in the last few years, which we've managed with as much care and strategy as we can summon. We've had a huge improvement in our educational achievement. Perhaps a little bit slow to get on that bandwagon compared to some parts of the country, but in the last 5 years or so really moved the population up in educational achievement. And we have a large number of kids in care. I think we have around 1,200 at the moment, spending 80 million on them. So this is not, we've got a 1.4 billion pound budget. So this is not a small job that we're doing in Norfolk. I wouldn't want you to think, oh well, it's Norfolk. It's an easy place to do this kind of thing. I've been in a number of local authorities in London and other places. This is real, and this has had a real challenge, I think, to be picked up by the people who've run with this for the last 10 years. And we know that nationally, children's services are facing huge increases in demand in these quite challenging circumstances. And I put this here not, to do anything other than say this, this requires new solutions, really. We know that the rate of children in care per 10,000, has the referral rate, which is the first line, the middle line, which is the number of children assessed as being in need of help or protection, is the second line, and the third one being the rate of the increase in children in care. You can see that, each I don't know if you can actually see, it's pretty little, but the blue line is Norfolk, the straight green line is England, and then the dots are our closest statistical neighbour. So you can see we've had, we're in line with some of the increases that have been experienced across the country in the last few years, and this is a situation that we need to find new solutions for, and this small in number, but I think important in the opportunities that it presents children. This boarding school partnership is one of the things we are pleased to be part of. we were asked to join the Boarding Pathfinder project by the DFE, and again, I think probably Sarah may have been the first person to respond to the call, and is with you here today. Attended the National Boarding School event in Dudley in 2008. It was taken forward by the virtual school, and it was overseen in that initial phase by an educational and social care kind of a forum. And now we've moved it into, because of the importance link between the education opportunity and social care, it's now managed within the educare services. And the people, Sarah and her colleagues will talk about the process that now goes through. We were mentioned in an article in Community Care early on, and I think that was encouraging, mentioned as a place that in Norfolk that was really taking on this challenge in a big way, and in the past that article gave us encouragement. So you'll see that there's been, in detail what has happened with each of these children, but I guess it was the initial success of several of the children with particularly high risk profiles in 2010 that we decided to make an investment in it and make sure that there was a commitment going forward in the social care and dedicated school grant. Some in these bubbles here are just some of the highlights. I won't read them out, but I think what I think Norfolk has demonstrated really is a belief that these kids are capable of doing this. If you are confident in their abilities and give them confidence in their own, that you assess them carefully and match them carefully, that you prepare the school well, that you, I've got, children and things go wrong, sometimes, and you've got to manage those things, and I think if you approach it in that way, the way parents do, probably with their own children, you'll probably, be thinking about it in the way it needs to be thought about. These are kids who need to adapt and adjust to their environment. The school also needs to get to know them, and there'll be hiccups along the way. And as we've done this research, people are recalling some of those vividly, but we didn't give up with it, and it proved to be the right approach for sure. And the comments been made today about the cost effectiveness of it. When you think of what some of us are spending to place children in services, I don't know what it's like in all parts of the country, but we're spending in some cases £3,000 a week, in residential placements for some of our more challenging teenagers and younger kids. It doesn't take long to start spending that money in better ways if you can find those special kids, not all of them, but some of them earlier on, probably in their in their lives, where they can take advantage of these opportunities. So, we're very proud, really, and that's why we're here today, to be amongst the leaders in local authorities. I think it has to do, as you'll see, from the personal leadership that this initiative has been shown by people working for us who, have believed in the initiative, had the schools and resources in Norfolk to work with us, and who have stuck at it over the years. And in joining this partnership, you can really see that we're trying to encourage other local authorities to do the same. I've worked in local government for a long time, and I know that sometimes, there's been a big gap between the perception. Even the image that's in the paper today of boarding schools, not the one I think most of us would recognize, but that image still lives on, and it's that we need to sort of tackle with the reality of boarding schools and the reality of today's kids, and really take up this, this opportunity for those kids that can really make a difference with it. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah Hatfield, who's our senior educational psychologist. I think she probably will be modest in her claims, but from what I can see, having joined this enterprise just a few years ago, she's had a major role in taking up this challenge and has been really, I think, well covered by some of our educational chief officers who couldn't be with us today, but it's really been some of that personal commitment that I would just like to give some credit to, where she probably won't take it. So there we are. I'm going to introduce Sarah Hatfield.
Thank you. I'll always take some credit, especially from the managing director. Good morning. My name is Sarah Hatfield. I'm a senior educational psychologist in Norfolk County Council, and as you've already heard, it was me in 2008, newly promoted to my role as senior educational psychologist, who got sent, actually, Wendy, up to Dudley to attend the event. So it was me that set it up under what was then called the Boarding Pathfinder scheme. You're going to hear briefly from me today, then you're going to hear from my colleague Judy, who currently manages the Boarding Partnership project, and finally you're going to hear from Lauren at the end there, who has been working really hard crunching all the stats and producing all the graphs that you'll see in your report this morning. I'd also like to highlight that there's a additional section in your reports today, which is a survey of participant views. And the reason it's come as an addition is that we've literally just been working on that in the last 4 or 5 weeks. So an important piece of background that I wanted to share, particularly for those of you who may be thinking of setting up your own boarding partnership scheme or are in the early stages of setting up a boarding partnership scheme, is, as we said, that in 2008 I was positioned in the virtual school, which was obviously in the education side of the authority. So that's where we began the initiative from, because that's what they told me to do in Dudley. It proved really, really successful. We made quite a few placements, some of pretty high risk. However, many things worked. The one thing that I was continually having difficulties around was engaging social care services sometimes as quickly as we needed. So for that reason, in 2013, a joint decision was made by the head of the virtual school and the then assistant director for social care to move the location of the project from education into social care. And I guess just to illustrate a little of what I mean by that is that obviously when the cases were coming to me, often from a social worker, the child and family were in a very difficult situation. Then once the child was placed in boarding, we often saw a pretty rapid stabilisation of the child and of the family situation. So for those of you that know how social care services worked, obviously then there was a reduction in social care support for that child and family. And in some cases, after several months, the case was even being closed to social care because obviously the child was no longer considered at risk. However, inevitably, some of those family situations then bubbled up, perhaps 6 months or a year on, either directly impacting on the child, which impacted on the school, or sometimes parents visiting schools and various other things, which meant we needed some social care support pretty rapidly. And it proved difficult for me and for schools to get the level of service that we needed. I'm pleased to report, and I'm sure you'll hear more today from Judy, that now it sits in Educare Services. We can obviously provide instant social care responses to schools if there are difficulties, and indeed also access to a range of different social care provision if needed. Okay, our steps to success. Again, the top one there proved very important in the early stages. As Wendy said, I was lucky enough to be very well supported by senior managers both in social care and in education. At that point, our virtual school had dual governance, if you like, which gave me the internal linkage I needed. As you can imagine, there were quite a lot of challenges and questions being asked as to what I was doing and what we were doing in education, trying to make social care placements. So it was really important to have that support right from the start. We're lucky in Norfolk that we've got Wyndham College, a large state boarding school. I know that we've got the executive principal here today, but obviously that was another key step to our success. And I'm very proud to say we've got very strong working relationships with many boarding schools within Norfolk. Again, that took a bit of time and effort to establish, and as I'm sure you can imagine, some of those working relationships were rather tested initially, as we duly supported some difficult individuals. However, I'd say it was by going through that process, in many cases, that we've established the really good understanding of each other that we have today. Again, from my perspective, I'd say what the schools valued, we might hear differently from Jonathan, but the impression I got is what they wanted is as much information as possible to know where to access further support if required, and in some cases they also appreciated accessing other services within the local authority. So, for example, a couple of schools we provided safeguarding training for, generally at a whole school level, because that was something that they felt they would benefit from. In one school where we had a particularly difficult young person, they had an even more difficult young person in the boarding house. So I gladly offered to work with both children, obviously not together but separately. Luckily for me, the other young person, who wasn't actually one of ours, showed a dramatic turnaround. So therefore they really rated my input there. So as my boss at the time said, it's a kind of buy one, get one free situation. But those were all things that I feel added to the strengthening of our relationships. The next point on the slide there is a particularly important one to me as a psychologist, so I'm a bit biased because that's obviously my skill set, but nevertheless that's supported by the research report in front of you, the real importance of a very comprehensive assessment of both child and family need. So initially, where as an educational psychologist we might have just looked at attainment and things like learning support, what became apparent pretty fast is the need to add on elements of assessment. So we added on a mental health screen, so that it was possible to have a baseline figure for things like anxiety and depression in young people. The purpose of that was obviously twofold, was to provide a baseline before the child went into boarding, so that we could see if difficulties emerged, whether they were getting worse or whether they were actually there before the boarding placement. And also to inform an intervention package to support that child, obviously, as soon as they were placed. So we added in that mental health screen. In some cases, I have to say not all, but I was very pleased to see that our research supported the need for thorough assessment, so I'm sure we'll be extending that element of the programme. I also made an assessment of resilience levels in some individuals and looked at strengths, which again gave vital information really to schools before they met with children and before they planned support. So underneath there, careful matching of child's needs, I think that includes obviously individual assessment level and also practical things like location of family members. So for example, we had one child that was known to run to family members, so an advantage of having a large county, we had to select a school far away from as many family members as possible just to minimise the risk. So some, just very practical things like that. Or if a school had a particular strength, for example, we've got one school that prepares people to swim in the Olympics. Sadly for me, I never managed to find an aspirational swimmer, but if we do, we know where to place them or where to consider placing them. So another really important thing to consider. And I think we've already talked about the establishment of educational and social care expertise, which sounds easy when it's on a slide there, but was a challenge for us internally. Okay, our results. I'm not going to read it all out for you. Obviously, that's the summary. You've got all the detail in front of you. I know Judy's going to talk a bit more about the figures. Basically, we showed a really impressive, though I say it myself, reduction in level of risk around social care. Educational outcomes were also good. I would also personally like to point out that clearly we know that research shows us the vital importance of having high aspirations, for educational outcomes for looked after children, because clearly research time and time again shows that high educational attainment is linked with a much more positive life trajectory. But I'd like to highlight that that wasn't our initial aim of the programme, if you like. We weren't trying to improve educational outcomes. Our aim was to support the social care side of a placement. And our research shows, or we hope shows, that if you make longer placements, we're feeling that that might have a greater impact on educational outcomes. We haven't got the evidence for that today, but we're offering that as a suggestion. And I think of great importance is something that Lord Agnew touched on, that it's not just the GCSE figures, it's some of those other skills that I've watched children learn and grow with by attending boarding school that aren't captured in the, obviously, attainment figures. So I think probably one of the the most difficult case that I have been involved in appears in our statistics as a failure, if you like, because she ended up becoming looked after making there were big safeguarding concerns, so basically her and all her siblings became looked after children. She didn't sadly finish her educational placement despite our best efforts. However, what she did do when we placed her in prep school is take up the flute, which still today is a source of pride and joy for her. So I'd like to suggest to you that there's lots of successes like that that aren't captured in our current research report. But I know Colin's got great plans to do another one, so I'm sure that will be included, not in Norfolk. Clearly it's financially favourable. Again, that's not something like the Telegraph, if you've seen it this morning, that we're wishing to promote, but clearly it makes sense for the taxpayer. And you're going to hear from Lauren that it's well received by children, families and schools. Right, so this is summarising the outcomes of our research, and the headlines there are in the purple bubble. So I hope I've mentioned the suitable matching, effective collaboration, and the need for a long-term commitment. What our research has shown is that for those young people that were placed for 3 years or more, we've got a much better outcome. But I would add to that, on a personal level, I think another part of the project that we haven't fully explored in Norfolk yet is the potential for placing students at sixth form. Because in my experience working with lots of young people, that's a key point, that sometimes young children do benefit from a complete change of scene and another last opportunity, if you like, to engage in formal education. However, just as I have managed to persuade our Assistant Director for Education to develop the project in that way, we completed this research which shows entirely the opposite. But nevertheless, I'm confident that in Norfolk we will explore that, and if you look at our placement numbers, we placed relatively few children of that age group. So I think that's an area for us to further develop. Right, I'm going to hand over to Judy now.
Hi everyone. I think I'll give you a bit of background about what my team looks like, because I think it might be quite interesting within the local authority. Some of you will know this because I came and spoke to you not that long ago. Within my team, we currently look after services for all care children, all children who are in care but need additional support. What we don't do in my team is placements. So I just want to make that clear. So if we're looking for a residential or foster placement, currently within my team I don't do that. But what I will do is provide emergency support in the home. Friday afternoons are usually very busy for me. So just to give you an example of where that sits within Norfolk County Council, because I think what I'm saying is we slide around in terms of supporting quite large numbers of young people. And I wanted to really tell you that because I wanted you to understand that actually we're trying to do planned work, but quite often we're doing crisis work at the same time. And I suspect those of you that hear from councils in children's services, you recognise what that looks like on a Friday afternoon. So sometimes looking at children and supporting children in boarding placements is challenging, because you've got all this crisis going on, but you want to do planned work as well. And I sort of wanted to explain that, I know where you are, but it can still be done in those circumstances. So first of all, I would like to just give you a bit of a profile of how we're placing, the sort of age group we're placing in year groups. So as you can see, the majority of children we're placing are, as you would expect, probably in years 7, 8 and 9. What was surprising to me is we're placing more males than females. I would have expected it to be the other way around. And this shows you that when you just go on and you're just running a programme, sometimes you don't notice these things. So it's really good to stand back. I think where we have placed at an older age, we've struggled a lot more. Some of that is around behaviour, if I'm honest, and real behaviour that's been going on for a long period of time, and it's really difficult to change as you get older. We know that. And sometimes it's the tolerance that schools have for that behaviour is challenging. I just wanted to talk to you about risk and how we looked at risk. So we looked at on placing children in the boarding schools. Where were they? So when we talk about risk, we're talking about those that are looked after children, those that are in child protection, and those that are child in need. So that's how we've looked at it. And then we've talked about universal services. No child that we looked at would be in universal service. I don't see, most of the children I see are either in child protection or looked after in my team. So that just gives you an example. If you turn to page 18 of the report, it's not on my slides, otherwise I would show you a bit more. What this shows you is where we started and where we ended. So where the children were when they started in terms of their area of risk, and then where they ended up. And I think that's quite a telling point, because we still have some that are looked after that we were hoping would not be looked after. What I would say about those is some of that, it's not necessarily that their risk increased. What we did is we found out more about those children and what was really going on for them. And actually, from a social work decision-making point of view, they couldn't go home. The safeguarding risks were too high. And that was more about finding out about what was really going on. And I wanted to make that really clear, because you can't always show that in statistics, but those who work in social care will know what I'm talking about really and how that works. But what I would say is that the majority, we did see a reduction, and quite a quick and big reduction. What we don't do is, when children are part of the boarding school arrangement, what we don't do is we don't close the case. So even if they are actually no longer a child in need, that case is still open to social work. Now I know that causes additional work, but actually this is about supporting the child and the family when they're in school. Because what we have seen, and I'm sure the schools will tell you this, is where we have closed the case, where it has gone wrong, the school's left holding the baby as such. And I know that we aren't always as good at supporting schools or the children in schools that we would like to be, but that was one way of mitigating against that. So what we were looking at is quite a marked reduction in looked after children, but also those in child protection. A lot of those children, when we were placed when they were under child protection, this was actually, it's either this or they're coming into care. There was, and you'll see from the supplementary report of the sort of profiles of the children we're talking about. What I would say is schools are taking these, the schools have worked really hard with us to take these children, and they surprise me, to be honest, because every time I look at a case I'm like, I don't think any school is going to is look at this child, and they do, and they support them, and they go out of their way. So working in partnership with the schools is really important for us. Some of the challenges. We're a large organisation, so we're a big authority. We do have a turnover of staff. We have a turnover of social work staff. That can be challenging because you spend a lot of your time promoting the scheme, just as where you think you've got social workers come to talk to you, they've left, or they've gone to another department or another team or whatever. So we do spend a lot of time trying to keep on top of that. I do attend the panels. We have panels to make decisions about children. Most local authorities will. I will be attending as many of those as I can. That's a really good way of finding the children, and I think that's probably the best way of finding the children that are suitable for placements. You need to keep it on people's agenda. That's quite challenging too, for reasons I've talked about. But also, I mean, I work very closely. Sarah and I have worked closely for a number of years. We're not that far away from each other, but we're not in the same office. We're certainly not in the same location. So there is those challenges as well. I think smaller authorities might have a bit more flex in that, but because we're spread around the county, that doesn't always work. Time. This is time consuming for small amounts of children. So if you're thinking about setting up dedicated time for would be amazing. I would really like some dedicated time to do this, but we don't have that luxury at this point in time. So it's about that working together and having a team that really all think about children that way. One of the other challenges is dumping, and what I mean is dumping with schools. I look at Jonathan when I say that because I'm sure that will come up. We try our best not to, but I think sometimes schools can feel like that, and it's about actually, if that feels like that, you've got my number, and you know, I will get calls from schools. I will have those discussions. The cases are quite challenging, and sometimes when you look at the profile of the child, it can be different to meeting the child, and schools do go out of their way to meet the child in, you know, at their home or in an environment that's perhaps a safer environment, rather than going into this big scary school and do a little bit of that. You know, the partnership with the school helps some of that. I think working with our educational psychologist is really important to support those challenges that children bring. A lot of what Sarah's done for those children is about how we mitigate against the risks that they bring. So it's actually, how can we support the school? What do we know about this child? How can we support this child? And Sarah's team has been brilliant in supporting that. In terms of what next, from our point of view, what looking back has helped us consolidate what we have done. It's really helped us rethink about how we can improve things that you just do, and then when you step back and look, you think actually we could improve that. We could improve while working across between education and social care. So it's actually reinvigorated some of the work that we're doing. It's reinvigorated some of the social work. So we've had a little bit of a flurry of referrals in the last couple of weeks. So you know, that's a good sign. Ready for September, but some of them hopefully maybe a little bit earlier. Presently, we are working on relationships and goodwill. Some of this, you know, because we believe in it, we're doing it. This isn't about money. This isn't about because we have to. This is because we want to, and I think that's really important. I think some of the other areas we'd like to do is improve our support with schools and in schools for those children that are placed. Gathering feedback from families and children. We haven't always done that, and we've started to do some of that work. So we've gone back and revisited and spoke to children who were on the boarding placements. Where are they now? That's been a challenge in its own right, but you know, we followed those children up, and it was a really good conversations to be having, because it just, you remember why you're doing it, and I think that's really important. One of the other areas we'd like to do, because we've not been very good at getting charitable support, and some of that is because when we're doing it and we're working at pace, and actually often the charities don't work at the pace that we need to work at. So we're thinking about it afterwards, and that doesn't always work. So it's just about how we improve that process, really. From our own point of view, I think this will enable us to go and talk to our social work teams again, and that's what we'd like to do. So it will be back on their agenda. It helps us to renew that. In terms of, this was one of the young people that we talked to. So her placement in a boarding school was her 16th school, and I think she was year 6 at the time. And I just thought, you know, from a pupil's or a young person's point of view, this is what she said. Thank you for your time. I'm going to be passing you over to Jonathan, I believe. I don't know if you... Oh, yeah, sorry, Lauren.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Judy. My name is Lauren Bosley, and I'm part of Norfolk County Council's research team, and I've been helping to evaluate the impact of Norfolk boarding school partnerships. So as Sarah and Judy have illustrated, initial analyses of the last 10 years of data indicated that children and young people with a boarding placement could benefit particularly from improved social care outcomes. In order to understand the impact of these outcomes, we felt that it was crucial to hear directly from those who'd been part of the program by exploring the views and experiences of young people, school staff, and social workers who are involved. Instead of just looking at the numbers, we wanted to hear the stories to gain a deeper insight into the data. This formed the basis of our supplementary research. Our overarching aim was to explore the perspectives of the young people, school staff, and social workers by evaluating the strengths, challenges, and improvements of the program. The purpose of the research was to inform and enhance the current model for boarding placements that was developed by Norfolk. And it's hoped that this model will provide a basis for other local authorities to further promote and develop boarding partnerships throughout the country. So who did we talk to? We started by inviting school staff from all 11 of the state and independent boarding schools who'd maintained placements over the last 10 years. We contacted 11 social workers who were supporting current students in boarding schools, and we invited 6 young people who had been through the boarding program. From the starting sample, and after quite a lot of chasing, we gained 10 responses, so 10 participants. This consisted of 7 school staff from 7 different boarding schools, 1 social worker, and 2 young people. All of our participants had been involved for a minimum of 4 years, so they could provide quite meaningful reflections of their experiences. A quick comment about the response rate. So we had quite a good response rate from the school staff, but low from social workers. On a surface level, we felt this could be a reflection of heavy caseloads, but also quite a tight research window. We also reflected whether we may have had a higher response rate from social workers if the request had gone out via social care channels as well as from an education channel. It's difficult to know for certain, but we feel that it highlights the importance of having very strong collaborative communication between social care and education. Response rate from young people was also low because we had to go through social worker channels to reach them. The 2 young people that agreed to take part, Sarah actually contacted directly, so we were able to provide them with information about the research in that way. Both these young people had been placed at boarding school during primary school, and their placements had been successfully maintained for around 5 to 6 years. We had one male and one female, current ages 17 and 21 years old. One had been looked after since they were 10, with 2 foster placements and 16 different school placements before boarding, and the other had been looked after since age 6, with 8 different foster placements. Both families had a history of long-term alcohol or mental health problems. Parental relationships had broken down, and families were struggling to care for their children at the time of placements. Once we had our sample, we started to gather views through questionnaires that asked open-ended questions around experiences relating to the strengths and benefits of the scheme, challenges surrounding the scheme, and potential improvements. We had a version for school staff and social workers, and a separate version for the young people to reflect the different roles of our participants and also keep it accessible. We analysed the questionnaires using the research method of thematic analysis, which identified 3 key themes and several related sub-themes from across all of the responses. And these were our themes. The three themes were preparation, communication, and boarding experience. So the first theme, preparation, outlined the importance of preparing children, young people, families, and boarding school staff for placements. Firstly, effective preparation could be achieved by including children and young people in decision-making processes, helping them feel part of the placement selection, having the opportunity to visit schools, and being provided with sufficient information about the process. Additionally, involving the parents and carers could help ease concerns around transitions and encourage their children and young people to engage with their placement. And finally, preparing school staff with an awareness and understanding of students' social, emotional, and educational needs could help schools plan for effective academic provision and emotional support. Within the second theme, communication was considered fundamental for supporting a consistent approach during placements. This included collaboration between school and partners such as social workers and the partnerships team to maintain regular contact, support, and ongoing monitoring of students' needs. Additionally, effective communication was identified as a tool that could help build and rebuild trusting relationships between our students and their families, peers, and school staff. This in turn was felt to help impact their social outcomes. Finally, participants felt that in increasing the awareness of boarding partnerships throughout services might enable more children and young people to access and benefit from the program. The final theme explored perceptions around the overall boarding experience. When evaluating social, emotional, and educational outcomes, the continuity of boarding, improved attendance rates were seen to support students in completing their education where they were previously at risk of dropping out. Access to wider curricular opportunities within boarding, such as additional sport, drama, and music, was also felt to positively influence students' general well-being, confidence, and learning. Regarding social outcomes, the structure and stability provided by boarding schools was felt to help prevent children and young people from being taken into care by easing the pressure on family circumstances. Additionally, participants expressed that boarding could offer a sense of stability and support during periods of change and uncertainty, and that local authority-assisted boarding could promote social diversity throughout the inclusion of students with different backgrounds, skills, and talents into schools. These findings were based directly on the responses of the young people, school staff, and social worker involved. A full thematic analysis has been compiled in a longer report that we're in the process of completing. And these are examples of the types of responses we got from participants that made up our themes. So one school staff commented, "The more time spent planning and sharing before placement, the better. When well planned, it's been highly successful." Another mentioned services need to be more aware of the benefits of the program can bring to young people and support their families. And our social worker expressed that young people achieved far greater educationally and made progress within their familiar relationships than what, despite numerous efforts, could be achieved without the provision. Particularly valuable reflections were those of the young people who'd been through the process. When one of our students was asked what worried them about the placement, they responded, I've never seen a difference between state and boarding educationally, but for someone that was passed around so much from family to family, it was great to have stability with a boarding school. I'm super grateful to the boarding school, and the amount of school support that they gave me was incredible. They didn't have to do that for someone in my position. I'm sure I would still be angry and disruptive if I just continued to be passed around lots of families and not gone to the boarding school. And when asked what they'd say to another child thinking about being placed, the response was direct: yes, do it. Now, naturally, we have to be careful around the generalisability of these experiences. And what's been reiterated throughout Norfolk's analyses is the importance of careful planning around the matching and suitability of this type of provision for children, families and schools. It won't be the solution for every scenario or situation, but when well prepared and effectively supported throughout, this type of boarding provision has the potential to change lives. So I leave you with one final message from another young participant. When asked what they'd say to someone considering boarding, they said, definitely, 100% go for it. Take it up and take all the opportunities you can, because your life can then really become something. And this is the message we hope other local authorities and boarding schools will take away today. Thank you very much.